The wind howled across the barren plains, carrying with it the faint sound of a child's trembling sobs, a fragile echo swallowed by the endless twilight. In the shadow of a gnarled mesquite tree, a young Apache girl knelt, her small hands trembling as tears carved trails over dust-streaked cheeks. The unforgiving wilderness watched silently, indifferent to her plight. Yet from the darkness emerged a solitary figure, a cazador Apache, his eyes sharp, his demeanor cold as the steel he carried, moving with the practiced caution of a man who had long ago severed ties to sentiment. He came intending to pass, to never entangle himself with weakness in a land where survival was all. The desert stretched vast and empty under a bruised sky, jagged rocks piercing the horizon. Dry earth cracked beneath the whispering wind that carried the scent of sage and distant smoke. Night was encroaching, swiftly promising a cold that would gnaw at any soul left exposed. Here, in this forsaken corner of the frontier, loneliness was a predator as hungry as any beast. The girl's tears glistened faintly, catching the last rays as if pleading for mercy from the inhospitable world. She was barely more than a child, small, bruised with tangled hair clinging to dirt-streaked skin. Her eyes, dark and wide, held a haunting mixture of fear and a fragile hope that clung stubbornly beneath her wavering breaths. Alone and abandoned, she was vulnerable, an easy prey for the countless dangers lurking beyond the sparse cover. Across the clearing, the cazador's figure was a stark contrast. His lean frame braced for confrontation, face weathered and unreadable, hardened by years of unforgiving hunts and tribal codes. His heart bore the weight of hardened detachment, yet now something unspoken stirred deep within. For all his skill and resolve, the sight of the girl's silent despair cracked through his armor of endurance. The rules that once dictated his detachment from such pitiful scenes faltered. To abandon her would be to condemn a piece of his own humanity to the darkness outside this fragile circle of fear and hope. But to intervene was to invite peril. His enemies were not far, and mercy was a luxury few afforded in these lands. His gaze lingered on the child, torn between duty to himself and a newfound call to protect. A gust stirred the dry grass, carrying with it a distant sound, a faint but unmistakable clatter of hooves against stone and earth. The threat that haunted this place drew nearer, unseen but ever present, forcing the cazador's hand toward a decision that would bind their fates together. His eyes hardened, resolve anchoring in the storm of his thoughts. No longer could he walk away. The thin thread of compassion forged in the girl's tears demanded action. He took a step forward, voice low but firm, carrying the weight of an unspoken promise. She flinched, eyes darting with a mix of dread and wary trust. The frontier had no mercy, but tonight it held its breath with them. The silence shattered again as the sound of horses neared, shadows on the edge of survival, closing in fast. Many fellow travelers who follow our frontier legends have told us that fate, or YouTube's trickster algorithm, sometimes unwinds their subscriptions without a warning. Before the next perilous trail reveals a new twist, take a swift glance below the video and make sure you're still signed up with our band to not lose the thread of this tale. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing across these rugged lands. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The clatter of hooves sharpened in the growing darkness, the sound ratcheting the tension that hung thick between the cazador and the APACHE girl beneath the mesquite. His eyes narrowed, scanning the edges of the barren clearing where shadows stretched like silent sentinels, blurring the line between hunter and hunted. With barely a whisper, he pulled the girl close, a shield formed less by warmth and more by the unyielding will that had carried him through countless dangers buried in these unforgiving plains. Her breath hitched as they crouched low beside the gnarled roots, the cold crawling beneath her thin skin like the gnawing threat beyond their fragile refuge. The cazador's gaze sliced through the gloom, watching the dust clouds curling with each gallop, closing in. His fingers brushed the crude leather pouch at his belt. Inside, the handful of herbs his mother once pressed upon him. Years ago, when the world held promises he'd long since buried beneath hardship and loss. A whisper slipped between them, the first in a long stretch of silence. "Why do they hunt you?" His voice was gravel and ice, an edge honed by years of being both predator and prey. The girl's wide eyes shimmered with reluctant trust, yet the answer was a fragile thing, trembling on the edge of words. She swallowed hard, the taste of gust thick on her tongue. "They say my people bring death, that we steal and burn." Her voice broke like a dry twig underfoot. "But I did nothing." He shook his head, bitter memories flickering behind his storm-dark eyes. "They see only what fear paints." The frontier was a cruel judge, blind to truths and deaf too. Please. Yet in her, he saw a flicker he had buried deep, the stubborn pulse of hope, fierce and fragile. Time dragged, each heartbeat swelling into an eternity as the hooves neared. The girl's trembling hands found the cazador's rough ones, a silent pact forged in desperation. He flexed his fingers, his grip answering with quiet promise. Whatever haunted these plains, whatever justice or vengeance sought them, he would face it. She was no longer alone, neither was he. Suddenly, the moon, a sliver in the bruised sky, flickered behind a veil of cloud, casting a pale light on a figure emerging at the clearing's edge. A rider cloaked in dust, slick with the sweat of pursuit. His presence was a knife's edge, sharp and unwelcome, the unmistakable emblem of the frontier's harsh hand embroidered on his weathered vest. A bounty hunter known for extinguishing flickers of mercy in the night. The cazador rose slowly, the creaking of leather and the subtle clink of steel sounding a low warning. His stance was both invitation and defiance. "You shouldn't be here," the hunter sneered, spitting words sharp as bullets. "That girl belongs to the desert now. No one protects her but the dead." A shiver coursed through the clearing, the weight of inevitability pressing down like the heavy sky. The cazador's voice cut through the chill, steady and resolute. "You'll find no peace in killing the innocent." His eyes burned, the fire of conviction ignited, a storm weathered but never broken. A tense pause stretched, a breath caught between whirls. The girl, trembling but bound by a thread of newfound courage, straightened slightly. Her small hands reached toward the leather pouch at the cazador's belt, her fingers brushing the worn surface as if summoning strength from ancient roots. "Run," he murmured fiercely, "but not yet." The horseman's leader tightened his grip on the reins, eyes narrowing. The desert whispered secrets to those who would listen, and tonight it told of choices that would carve their names into the unforgiving stone of these lands. The cazador's gaze flickered once to the horizon, where the first pale light of dawn threatened to bleed through the night's heavy curtain. Then, with a sudden fluid motion, he drew his knife, not with the frantic panic of a cornered man, but the lethal grace of a hunter made for war. The blade caught the moonlight, tracing a silver arc through the dark, as he stepped between the girl and the approaching wrath. The horseman charged, a thunderous wave breaking upon the shore of fragile hope. The cazador met them with the precision of a man who had long mastered the dance of death, each movement a testament to survival, born not from cruelty, but from a will that refused surrender. Yet amidst the clash of steel and the roar of hooves, the girl's eyes caught a glimpse of something deeper, a fleeting shadow crossing the face of the bounty hunter, a hesitation barely contained. The frontier was counting their breaths now, every second a thread pulled taut between despair and salvation. As arrows hissed through the night and dust swirled in chaotic ballet, the cazador felt a sharp sting, a searing jolt that cut through his practiced detachment. A sudden surge of pain flared in his side where a hidden blade had found flesh. His grip faltered, the world tilting on the edge of a knife. With a final burst of iron will, he drove the girl toward a narrow ravine, a desperate sanctuary carved by time and silence, where even pursuers dared not tread lightly. "Go," he gasped. "Promise me, you survive." She hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding, tears mixing with dirt, eyes blazing with a fierce resolve, born of survival and something yet unnamed, a call to fight, to endure beyond this night. Behind her, the struggle raged. Steel met steel, grunts of pain woven into the desert's ancient song. The cazador pushed through the haze of agony, every breath a battle against the creeping shadow of oblivion. Then, as the first light streaked crimson across the horizon, a sudden, shattering crack split the night. A rifle shot, precise and inevitable. The cazador's body tensed, the world narrowing to the line of fire. The girl's sobs erupted from the ravine as she dared a glance back, her heart a shattered compass. But the sound that followed chilled bone deeper than death, the slow, deliberate tread of boots approaching the silence after the gun smoke, carrying with them a new presence, unseen yet unmistakably close, lingering in the breathless gap between what was lost and what remained. And in that haunting pause, a whisper floated on the dawn wind, carrying a truth no one dared voice. Someone watched, waiting, and the next choice wouldn't be theirs alone. The desert held its breath once more. The clash of steel and thunder of hooves ripped through the fragile silence, dust swirling like a restless ghost across the barren earth. The cazador's breath came ragged, each exhale a battle against the searing pain that bloomed in his side. A cruel testament to the hidden blade's silent cruelty. Yet his gaze never faltered, locked on the dark shapes pressing in with merciless intent. Behind him, the Apache girl darted between shadows, her small frame guided by fear and the fierce promise of survival, etched into the fierce eyes of the man who had become her shield. The narrow ravine yawned before her, a secret wound carved by time in the unforgiving land, a refuge that seemed both sanctuary and snare as the horses' pounding hooves echoed closer, relentless in their pursuit. The cazador stumbled, a curse tearing from his throat as grit met raw flesh. He forced himself upright, every movement a stubborn defiance of the pain that sought to claim him. His hands, rough and steady, reached out to steady the trembling girl, his voice low but unwavering. "This way. Stay close. Trust the land. It knows the secrets they don't." Her eyes locked onto his, a flicker of understanding kindling through the haze of terror. The wilderness was cruel, yes, but it bore memories, old paths and hidden crevices where shadows could outwit even the most merciless hunters. They slipped into the ravine's embrace, the walls rising steep and jagged, cloaked in the sullen whisper of wind, threading through twisted branches and cracked stone. The girl's sobs had stilled, replaced by a breathless quiet that hummed with tension. Every snapped twig, every hidden rustle, held the weight of threat. A murmur from the sacador broke the silence. "They won't follow. Too narrow. Too dangerous for horses. But we aren't safe yet." The girl nodded, wiping grime-matted hair from her eyes, determination sharpening her fragile form. "Why do they want me so badly? What did I do to deserve their hatred?" His gaze softened for a flicker, a rare crack in the fortress of his detachment. "Because fear breeds enemies like weeds. They see you as a shadow in their fears, a target to destroy, so they can pretend the world is safe again." Her small hands clenched into fists, trembling but resolute. "I'm not just a shadow." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, yet it quivered with the weight of something fierce, unforgiving, hope. The cazador's eyes flickered to the jagged light bleeding through the ravine's crest. Time was thinning. The distant clatter of hooves had become a dull roar, the hunters closing in like a tide that refused retreat. Yet he stayed silent, calculating, waiting for the moment when desperation would bend the rules. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed, a branch snapping somewhere deeper in the ravine. The girl froze, breath caught in her chest as the dark-cloaked shapes moved with deadly precision. Shadows shifted between rock and earth, like silent predators on a trail. A voice hissed, low and venomous, carried faintly on the breeze. "She can't hide forever." The cazador's response was a slow, calculated movement, his hand closing once more around the worn leather pouch at his belt. Inside lay more than herbs. It held memories, promises carved by the hands of ancestors who had walked these lands long before guns and greed. "They hunt not just with bullets," he murmured, voice rough as stones, "but with shadows of fear and chains forged in hate." A sudden surge of adrenaline ripped through both. The girl gripped his arm, anchoring herself against the storm of panic. Her voice was steadier now, rippling with the bitter salt of growing courage. Then let us be ghosts. Let us be shadows they cannot touch. The gachador's lips twitched into a semblance of a grim smile, a fragile defiance amidst the encroaching darkness. Ghosts, yes, but ghosts who will fight. With painstaking effort, he pulled the girl deeper into the ravine's tangled shadows, feet scrabbling against loose stone as he leaned into the sharp pain resurrecting with every step. Behind them, the horsemen's curses spilled into the night, promises of death and desolation. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye, one ridge above. A figure, silent, motionless, watching, eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight, unreadable in their stillness. The gachador froze, every muscle coiled, senses screaming a warning he dared not speak aloud. The girl, sensing the shift, pressed closer. "Who is that?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, a cold whisper sliced through his mind. A name long buried beneath years of shadow and blood. A hunter as ruthless as the men behind them, but cloaked in secrets darker still. "They're not alone," he said finally, voice low, heavy with the weight of destiny. The hunter's saber gleamed faintly as moonlight kissed its edge. A step sounded, soft, deliberate, closer than any had dared be. The balance of the night teetered on a knife's edge. "Ready yourself," the cazador breathed. "This fight will shape more than our lives. It will ripple through all who dwell in these broken lands." The girl nodded, eyes wide but fierce, holding on to the fragile thread of trust binding them together. The cold breeze twisted in the hollows of the ravine, carrying a whisper that frayed nerves and stirred ancient echoes. A sudden rustle. The unseen watcher shifted, stepping from the veil into a pale shaft of moonlight. The rider's silhouette was unmistakably that of a woman, garbed in worn leather, eyes burning with a quiet fire that rivaled the stars themselves. The cazador's breath caught. Neither friend nor foe, she was an enigma, carved from the same unforgiving land they fought to survive. Her gaze swept the scene before settling on the girl, and then on him. "I've been hunting shadows," her voice was a cold melody, "but this night sings of a different prey." A charged silence stretched over the clearing, raw and humming. The distant horseman's cry ceased abruptly, and in the space where all waited, hearts thudded a fierce rhythm against the vast, unforgiving night. The cazador met the woman's gaze, steel and storm intertwining in the heavy air. "Who are you?" he demanded, every fiber taut with threat and necessity. Her smile was a razor's edge, the reckoning you did not see coming. Then, as if the night refused to hold its secrets any longer, a low rumble drifted from the ravine's depths, a tremor beneath the earth itself, subtle yet undeniable. The ground beneath their feet whispered a warning, older than pain or war. And in that impossible moment, the line between hunter and hunted blurred forever. The wind shifted again, carrying a voice from the dark, cold and clear. "Your enemies are not just behind you anymore." The desert exhaled its ancient breath, and change, ruthless and unpredictable, had just been born. The air hung heavy with tension as the last whisper of the rider's declaration faded into the cold night. The cazador's breath came in rough bursts, mingling with the girl's shallow gasps, their sanctuary shrinking. The ravine's jagged walls closing in like the walls of a cage forged by fate and fear. The woman in leather held her ground just beyond the flickering reach of their flickering firelight, her gaze sharp beneath the moon's wan glow. She was neither friend nor sworn enemy, her presence a wild card in the deadly hand they'd been dealt. The cazador's eyes flicked between her and the worn leather pouch at his belt, heart hammering with a sudden pulse of old, unwelcome memories. "Why do you follow?" His voice was low, rough-hewn as stone worn by desert winds. "Are you hunter, savior, or something darker?" Her lips curved in a slow smile that held no warmth. "I track truths buried beneath blood and lies. This girl, she carries more than fear. She bears a reckoning long overdue." The child, nestled against the cazador's side, blinked away. Tears. The faint glow of courage sparking in the depths of her wide eyes. The wind carried with it the scent of smoke, distant and acrid. The hunt inching closer, relentless. There was no time for hesitation. The cazador rose cautiously, every careful movement a battle against the sharp sting blooming in his side. "Then we move at once. The dawn will be their advantage." The woman studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "There is a path through the canyons, hidden by shadows known only to the land and whispers." She glanced at the girl, voice softening just enough to betray the faintest trace of something near compassion. "If you survive, it will be by more than blade and bullet." Together the unlikely trio slipped from the ravine's protective grasp, stepping lightly toward the brittle edges of the wilderness. The girl's small hand found the cazador's with trembling certainty, anchoring herself against the night's bitter breath. As they moved, the cazador felt the heavy weight of responsibility settle like a stone in his chest. This was no longer a pursuit born of mere survival. Layers of history, blood debts, and silent promises wrapped around them like a shroud. The woman's footsteps were measured, her knowledge of the land a silent tide guiding them through winding crevices and thickets thick with secrets. Occasionally, she glanced back with a wary eye toward the faint sounds of pursuit, hooves thudding in the distance, voices brittle with menace. In the pale light of the rising dawn, the ravine opened into a narrow canyon where the air thickened with the scent of damp earth and sage. Here, the woman slowed, her gaze sharpened, scanning the rocky walls as if listening for some hidden pulse. "We are not alone," she murmured, voice barely above the wind's soft murmur. "Others have claimed this place, shadows waiting to tip the scale when the time comes." The cazador's hand dropped to the pistol at his hip, fingers curling tightly around the worn grip. His mind raced. The girl's survival now depended not only on his skill, but on unraveling the deeper enmities breathing beneath the surface of this rugged land. The child's voice broke the tense silence. "Will they find us here? Will I have to hide forever?" His gaze softened, the enduring hardness giving way to a quiet resolve. No one is meant to live only in shadows, he said. But sometimes, bending the night's will is the path to dawn. A sudden movement caught their attention. Hidden among the scraggly underbrush, faint eyes reflected the morning light briefly before vanishing. The cazador stiffened. The hunt was closing. The noose. "Prepare yourself," the woman warned, stepping forward and pulling from her belt a slender knife etched with ancient symbols. Not all enemies chase on horseback. Some are born of shadow. The girl's breath hitched, but she did not withdraw. Instead, her fingers brushed again across the leather pouch at the cazador's side, her touch lingering as if drawing strength from the stories sealed within. A low growl rumbled from deep within the canyon, shaking loose stones from the craggy walls. The earth seemed to test their fragile hold against time, threatening to swallow the remnants of this desperate flight whole. From the thinning brush, figures emerged, silent, watchful, their intentions unreadable but unmistakably hostile. The cazador stepped forward, placing himself where blade and body might shield the fragile hope clinging to this ragged company. The tension snapped as the leader, a man cloaked in worn buffalo hide, eyes like flint, face carved with scars of battles, both ancient and recent, raised a hand. Silence pressed down like a physical weight. "We all carry ghosts," the leader said, voice deep as graves. "But it's the living we fear most." Their words hung in the air as the girl's pulse thundered, hers and the world's, beaten into a rhythm that carried the promise of unrelenting storm. The cazador's gaze locked with the leader's, defiance igniting within the burning pits of his eyes. "Try to break us," he said, voice steady, "and you'll find yourself marked by more than scars." A tense stillness stretched between the two forces, raw and electric. Then, from the shadows beyond, the woman in leather shifted again, stepping forward with a flicker of steel, catching the first light of day. Eyes met, unspoken truths charged the air. Just as the sun broke free, from its bruised horizon, a piercing cry shattered the fragile calm. The girl's voice, fierce and unyielding, as from the jagged cliff above, a volley of arrows rained down. Chaos erupted. The canyon walls echoed with battle cries, the clash of steel, and the tearing surge of survival instinct flaring like lightning through dry grass after a storm. Amidst the fray, the cazador caught sight of the bounty hunter's leader, slipping from the melee, heading for a shadowed crevice. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked on the girl before narrowing in cruel realization. The chase was far from over. But then, a sudden crack beneath their feet, a thunderous rumble as the earth itself groaned in protest. Dust and stones cascaded from the canyon walls, spurred by an unseen force awakening from ancient slumber. The ground split open, a gaping chasm swallowing the very path they'd fled down. Amid the chaos and clamor, the cazador's voice rose, sharp and urgent. "The land fights with us, or against us. Choose your step wisely." The girl's hand found his again, trembling but fierce, and from the jagged edge of that abyss, a new presence stirred, a shadow darker and deeper than any they'd faced before. The next breath would decide not just their fate, but the balance of the wild frontier itself. The moon slipped behind a ragged cloud, cloaking the ravine in deeper shadows. The air hung heavy with the stale scent of blood and dust, mingling with the faint rustle of dry leaves, stirred by a restless wind. The cazador's breath came in shallow bursts, each exhale a ghost vanishing into the cold night. Pain laced through his side, sharp and relentless, but he pressed forward, teeth clenched, every muscle coiled against surrender. The girl's small hand remained locked in his, fragile but steady, a tether to the flickering flame of life between them. The first horseman's shadow slipped between jagged rocks, silent as a stalking wolf. The cazador's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening around the worn leather pouch at his belt, drawing strength from its familiar weight. The scent of sage and crushed earth rose faintly from within, a reminder of his mother's whispered prayers and promises forged in hardship. Stay close. He rasped, voice rough as gravel, guiding her deeper into the narrow gorge. These walls know the secrets fear can't reach. Her narrowed eyes searched his face, the uncertainty mingling with a burgeoning defiance. Will they follow us all the way here? He did not answer immediately. A low cry, distant yet urgent, cut through the silence, a warning carried on the wind. The horses were relentless, and so were the men who rode them, their hatred etched deep like scars mapped across time. The girl swallowed hard, her breath a fragile rhythm between courage and dread. Why do they hate us so? The cazador's gaze held the bruised sky above, because what they fear lives in the shadows of their own hearts. Their whispered conversation was shattered by the sudden crack of a branch breaking under a heavy boot. Heads turned sharply towards the sound. From the darkness, a cold voice hissed, laced with venom. She can't hide forever. The cazador swept an arm protectively across the girl's narrow shoulders. Then let them come, he said, voice steady with the fire of old ghosts rising anew. He pulled the girl toward a tight crevice where the earth seemed to fold in protective arms. The walls of the ravine rose jagged and unforgiving. Yet here, in this ancient sanctuary, hope clung like stubborn moss. The distant thunder of hooves approached, the aura of danger tightening around their fragile hold. Yet still, the cazador's resolve burned sharp, a blade forged in loss and survival. Without warning, a figure broke from the shadows above, the woman from the night before, clothed in worn leather, her eyes glinting with a cold fire that rivaled the stars. She moved with haunting grace, neither ally nor enemy, an enigma carved from the wilderness itself. The cazador's gaze locked with hers, the air thick with unspoken tension. Why do you follow us? Her smile was a shard of ice. Because this night belongs to more than the hunters chasing shadows. Before he could reply, a sudden rumble shook the earth beneath their feet. Stones loosened, tumbling into the depths below with a sound like ancient bones, grinding. The very land seemed to awaken, its voice a warning, older than any blade or bullet. The girl's wide eyes widened with frightened awe. What's happening? The land, the cazador murmured, voice low and reverent. Reminds us it holds the final say. From the twisting shadows, more figures emerged. Faces painted with scars and eyes dark with old grudges. Their hostility radiated like heat off cracked earth. Pressing against the fragile hope gathered in the ravine's heart, steel was drawn. The clash was inevitable. The girl tucked close, her small frame trembling but unbroken, drawing silent strength from the man who had become her defender. The cazador's sword arced through the air with deadly precision, a dance honed by years beneath unforgiving skies. The woman moved alongside them like a ghost, her presence a volatile force that shifted the balance with every breath. Together they were an unlikely trio clinging to a thread stretched taut between survival and oblivion. Amidst the fury, the girl's gaze caught a glimpse of the bounty hunter's cruel eyes, flashing with cold calculation. The hunt was far from over. Then, as sudden as it began, the tremor beneath the earth grew violent, a deep fissure ripping through the ravine floor, swallowing rock and dust in a devouring maw. The ground yawned wide, splitting their path, cutting away the escape the pursuers had hoped to claim. The cazador steadied himself against the trembling earth, his voice a harsh whisper that barely stirred the wind. The frontier breathes its own fury. We walk on lands older than grudges. The fight is no longer just between men. The girl gripped his arm tighter, her breath sharp in the sharp morning air. Somewhere in the distance, the first pale light bled across the bruised horizon, promising the dawn, yet shadow clung stubbornly to the edges. Suddenly, the woman in leather stepped forward, her blade gleaming with a wild light, her eyes locked on the fisher, then on the advancing enemies. Not all threats come with gunshots and hooves, she warned. Some are born from the earth we tread. A silence fell, heavy and electric, broken only by the ragged breaths of those caught between prey and predator, shadow and light. A single arrow sliced through the dawn, its flight swift and sure, striking a figure moving from the fight's edge toward the ravine's dark mouth. The cazador's heart clenched, a crack in their fragile defense, a new peril born from the same wild land that had offered both refuge and doom. The girl's sob caught in her throat as the ground itself seemed to pulse beneath them, alive with ancient fury. And then came the voice, a whisper carried on the first chill breeze of morning, cold and clear as a steel blade drawn in the night. Your enemies are not the only ones who watch. Something older stirs beyond the stones. The world held its breath, and fate, relentless as the desert wind, continued to weave its cruel design. The hunting cries faded into the choking dust as the cazador staggered backward. The searing ache in his side, tightening like a noose around his breath. His grip on the blade faltered, but his eyes remained fierce, never breaking from the desperate grasp he held on the fragile hope crouched just beside him. The girl's small hand, trembling but steadfast, clung to his rough one, anchoring them both in this endless night. The earth groaned beneath their feet, a low rumble that rolled through the ravine, like a warning whispered by ancient spirits, long forgotten by the world above. Stones shifted precariously along the walls, loose fragments scraping in protest to the sudden tremor, sending brittle echoes through the air, thick with tension and fear. From the shadows, the woman, clad in worn leather, stepped closer, her sharp gaze scanning the jagged crevices where dust hung suspended like a fragile veil. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone born of this wilderness, unseen yet always watching, a ghost entwined with the land's secrets. "They come with more than bullets tonight," she murmured, voice low and edged with something older than steel. "The earth itself turns against us." The Cossador's breath hitched. Now more than ever, the line between the living and the shadows blurred. Every instinct screamed warning. Every muscle tensed for the fight that kept chaining them to this land's merciless rhythm. The girl's eyes, wide and glistening, flickered with a stubborn light, a defiance that refused to be snuffed by the approaching storm. Her voice, though fragile, carried a new weight. "Then let us be shadows too, gone with the wind, impossible to catch." A bitter smile flickered across the Cazador's face, a storm weathered but never extinguished. Ghosts with claws. He tightened his grip on the leather pouch hanging from his belt. Inside, the dried herbs, tokens from a past life, seemed to pulse with their own quiet power. A promise etched in memory, a reminder of roots deeper than any blade. Mounted horsemen surged at the ravine's entrance, their heavy hoofbeats pounding like a death knell against the cracked earth. Their voices were rough, jagged with hate and urgency, the relentless chorus of a hunt with no mercy. The Cazador backed the girl into a narrow fissure, nearly shadowless in the moonlight, its wall sheer and unforgiving. Here, even the most tireless pursuers dared not venture. The horses could not follow where rocks jutted like the bones of giants. But danger persisted. The unseen threatened beyond the limits of earth and stone. A sudden cry shattered the brittle silence. A woman's voice, sharp and exact, cutting through the night like a blade. The woman in leather's eyes narrowed as she readied the slender knife at her hip, the blade reflecting a pale, eerie glow. "Not all death rides on horseback," she said. "Some stalks with silent feet, and not all enemies wear faces we can see." The girl swallowed hard, gripping the Cazador's hand tighter still. The raw edge of courage bloomed, uneasy but fierce. The sound of snapping branches grew closer. Shapes slid through the brush, shadows within shadows, closing like the jaws of a trap. Among them were faces marked by cruelty, eyes filled with grudges, honed sharper than any arrow's point. The Cazador moved with practiced grace, placing himself between the girl and the advancing threat. His breath steadied, despite the stabbing pain that bloomed in his side, a reminder of the fragility threaded through the hard skin of survival. Steel sang through the night, a deadly dance of desperation and will. The girl pressed into the folds of his worn coat, breathing shallow, heart pounding a wild rhythm tuned to the hunt. Around them, the earth shuddered again. Loose stones cascaded in a miniature avalanche, rattling down the deep ravine. Amid the chaos, the bounty hunter's chill glare found the girl once more. His intent was clear, merciless, a hunter's promise etched deep in the lines of his weathered face. Then the ground lurched abruptly, a brutal rupture cracking open, the ravine floor with thunderous fury. Dust and shattered rock exploded upward, swallowing the narrow path behind them in a mouth of jagged stone. A stifled gasp caught in the girl's throat, eyes wide with dawning terror. The cazador braced himself against the canyon's trembling walls. His voice was steady, carving through the storm of noise and pain. The land itself rebels. This fight is far older than us all. From the thinning shadows, the woman in leather stepped forward, blade flashing with an unnatural gleam. Her gaze hardened as she scanned the unfolding chaos. Some battles are won or lost beneath the earth, not by gunfire or steel. The girl's fingers brushed the leather pouch again, searching in its silence for strength, for the stories bound tight in faded inks and dried leaves, memories of a time before hatred carved scars across the desert. Beyond the shattered earth, figures materialized, eyes gleaming with menace, faces set like hardened stone. The leader, draped in a ragged buffalo hide, radiated an awful confidence. His voice rumbled low, words heavy with age-old grudges. We all carry ghosts, but the living, they threaten the balance. A breathless moment hung suspended in the chilling dawn. The fragile thread of hope stretched perilously thin between clash and silence. The cazador's eyes locked on the scarred leader. Defiance blazing, an unyielding fire bright enough to burn through shadows. "Try to break us," he growled, "and you'll find your scars marked with story." Suddenly, a sharp, piercing whistle cut through the silence. From the jagged rim above, a volley of arrows streaked down, swift, lethal, and unrelenting. The girl's scream tore through the morning air, fierce and unbroken despite the fear. The canyon walls echoed back the furious chorus of battle, steel clashing, shouts of defiance, and the wild surge of survival instinct bursting like lightning against dry tinder. Amid the chaos, a shadow slipped quietly away, cold-eyed, calculating. The bounty hunter vanished into the dark crevice, his gaze fixed mercilessly on the girl, narrowing like a snare, tightening its grip. But then the earth groaned once more. Louder, deeper, a fierce tremor shaking the very bones of the canyon. Cracks spiderwebbed through the stone, jagged splits gaped open, swallowing whole the ground they'd fled across. The cazador gritted his teeth against the shaking world. "The land remembers every wound," he muttered. "We don't just fight men tonight, but the fury of the earth itself." The girl's hand found his, trembling yet steady, their shared strength, a fragile shield against the growing storm. And as the rattling dust settled for a breathless moment, a voice cut through the cold morning air, thin, sharp, and chilling to the bone. "Your enemies are not just behind you anymore." The ravine swallowed the last echo, and the frontier waited, dark and unyielding, for the reckoning to come. The sharp crack of the rifle shot echoed across the ravine, just as the earth trembled beneath their feet. The cazador's breath hitched, his body stiffening against the searing pain blossoming in his side. He barely had time to grasp the girl's trembling hand before the ground beneath them shuddered violently, shards of stone cascading down the canyon walls like silent screams. In that instant, the world ruptured. A jagged fissure split the rocky floor where they stood, swallowing the path behind them in a ravenous maw of dust and shattered earth. The canyon's ancient bones groaned in protest, deep and unforgiving, as if the very land itself sought to claim them. The girl's eyes widened, tears glistening in the dim dawn light as fear and shock intertwined in a fragile knot within her chest. The cazador gritted his teeth, propping himself against the jagged wall where the raw sting in his side flared anew. His voice, rough and resolute, broke the suspended silence. The land remembers every wound and holds power far beyond our reckoning. Beside him, the woman in worn leather, her presence still inscrutable, stepped forward, the blade in her hand, catching the morning's pale light. Her gaze sharpened, scanning the torn earth with a soldier's precision. "Some battles are decided beneath the feet of men," she whispered, voice heavy with a warning older than any law of guns and blood. The girl clung tighter to the cazador, drawing reluctant strength from the man who had become her protector. Her voice, once fragile, held a new, fierce edge as she whispered, "The ground itself turns against us. What do we face beyond the shadows?" His eyes hardened with a mixture of pain and determination. "We face more than bounty hunters tonight. The frontier itself awakens, a wildness older than hatred, swifter than the bullet's flight." From the dark recesses of the ravine, hostile figures materialized, scarred faces etched with malice, eyes cold and empty as the vast void. Their leader, cloaked in battered buffalo hide, stepped forward. His voice rumbled with grudges carried through decades. "We all bear ghosts in this land," the man said, voice gravel and fire. "But it's the living who disturb the balance with the faint flicker of hope." The words landed like stones in the tense air. The cazador's voice cut through the charged silence, coiling like a snake ready to strike. "Try to break us, and your scars will be tales for the next storm." Suddenly, sharp whistles pierced the dawn air. A deathly volley of arrows arced from the jagged cliffs above. The girl's fierce cry cracked the fragile calm as arrows found their marks among the advancing enemies. The ravine erupted in a tumult of battle cries and clashing steel. The cazador moved with grim expertise, despite the burn in his side. Every strike measured, every breath a refusal to succumb. The woman wove through the fray like a shadow incarnate, her presence a wild force that tipped the scales between life and death. Through the chaos, the bounty hunter leader slipped silently into the shadows, his gaze fixing coldly on the girl. His menace was a tightening noose, a reminder that this hunt was far from over. And then the earth roared in sudden protest. The fissure beneath them shuddered violently, tearing open wider, swallowing the narrow passage. In a ravenous, gaping chasm, dust and stones rained down, the canyon's bones exposed in a horrifying display of nature's wrath. The cazador planted himself firmly on unsteady ground, voice low but powerful. "The land does not forget its wounds. Tonight, we fight not only for our lives, but against the fury of the earth itself." The girl's hand tightened around his, small but fierce, sparking a silent promise in the fragile morning light. From the thicket ahead, the woman's blade gleamed once more as she stepped forward, eyes flashing with cold fire. "Not all enemies come with hooves and gunfire," she warned. "Some dwell in shadows deeper than men's hearts." A tense silence swallowed the ravine, broken only by the ragged breaths of those caught between destiny and doom. Suddenly, a piercing voice cut through the quiet, the girl's own, fierce and unyielding. From the jagged cliffs above, another volley rained down, the arrows swift as death's own song. As stone shattered and steel sang, the cazador's eyes locked once again with the cruelty etched into the bounty hunter's face. The relentless chase stretched onward, a twisted dance of vengeance and survival. Then came the cold whisper, a voice far older than guns, blending with the breath of the dust-choked wind. Your enemies no longer walk behind you, it said, sharp as a knife's edge. The world seemed to still, swallowing their collective breath, as the frontier's oldest reckoning stirred beneath their feet. And the fight, for their souls, for the land, was only just beginning. The clash of steel and thunderous hoofbeats tore through the fragile stillness of the ravine. Grit and blood mingled in the air as the cazador battled through the blur of motion, every strike a fierce defiance against the crushing weight of pain blooming in his side. Each breath stung, shallow and ragged, yet in the depths of his storm-dark eyes burned a fire unyielding, a promise forged in years of hardship that this night would not claim them so easily. Beside him, the Apache girl clung tightly, her small frame pressed close as they navigated the jagged shadows of the narrowing gorge. The walls rose like ancient sentinels, their cragged faces swallowing the meager moonlight, turning the world into a labyrinth where hopes hung by the thinnest thread. Her trembling fingers curled around the worn leather pouch at his belt, seeking the comfort of roots older than the hatred that hunted them. Behind them, the snarling echoes of the pursuers grew nearer, unforgiving as the desert wind that had borne their cries from countless nights before. The woman in leather, the enigma who had emerged from the darkness, moved with ghost-like grace, her presence a silent ward against the encroaching shadows. No friendly spirit, no easy ally, yet her blades sang a deadly song that wove through the chaos like a lifeline. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled, a low growl that rolled through the ravine, like a vengeful beast awakening from a long slumber. The cazador's hand tightened around the girl's, rounding her trembling courage as the earth itself seemed to rise in protest. Loose stones rattled down the walls, teasing madness to the edge of reason. "They come with more than gunfire tonight," the woman whispered, her voice slicing through the din. "The land remembers every wound, and it will not let them take you without a reckoning." His lips pressed into a thin line. Old memories flickered, ghosts of ancestors who had walked these unforgiving lands long before hatred dared cross the plains. There was truth buried deeper than any bullet, and tonight it clawed its way to the surface. A sudden, sharp snap disrupted the tense air. An arrow hurled from the shadowed cliff above, swift and cruel. The girl's gasp shattered what little calm remained as the missile found its mark among their attackers, turning the tide briefly with the promise of desperate hope. Steel clashed, voices roared, and the canyon became a tempest of fury and survival. The bounty hunter's cruel gaze found the girl again, narrowing with the cold precision of a man who viewed mercy as a weakness to be extinguished. His silhouette slipped away from the maelstrom, weaving toward a dark crevice, unmarked by the chaos. The hunt was far from over, and his resolve was as unyielding as the desert sun. Then came the earth's violent cry, a savage rent tearing through the ravine floor with a force both ancient and terrible. Dust and shattered rock rained down in a chaotic cascade, swallowing the pathway behind them whole. The canyon groaned, bones of the earth exposed in a terrifying display of nature's fury. The cazador braced against the trembling wall, voice carrying the weight of burden and truth. The land fights with us or against us. This is no mere hunt. It's a reckoning older than the gun, older than the blood spilled here. The girl gripped his hand fiercely, the raw edge of survival sharpening her resolve. Her wide eyes, once pools of fragile fear, now blazed with a fierce light born of the darkest night and the faintest dawn. The woman stepped forward once more, blade catching the pale light like a shard of broken hope. Not all enemies ride on horseback, she warned. Some live in the shadowed cracks of this land, quiet, patient, and deadly. Their breaths came fast, mingling with the scent of sage and dust. The approaching footsteps faltered, then multiplied. Figures emerging stealthily from the underbrush, faces carved from cruelty and years of bitterness. The leader, wrapped in a tattered buffalo hide cloak, bore scars etched deep as the canyons themselves. His voice rumbled, voice worn but fierce. "We all carry ghosts," he said, eyes shimmering like steel. "But it is the living who threaten the fragile balance, those flickers of hope that will not die." The cazador met his gaze with unflinching fire, the strength of countless battles burning in his voice. "Try to break us, and your scars will bear the story." Before the threat could fully descend, a sharp whistle cleaved the air. Arrows rained from the cliffs, swift, lethal, each a messenger of death. The girl's fierce cry pierced the storm, a wild chorus of defiance that shook the canyon walls. The violence erupted again, a desperate dance of steel and survival, played out against the indifferent sky. The cazador fought with a grim grace, despite the fire blossoming at his side, his every movement an act of defiance against oblivion. The woman wove through the fray, a shadow wielding steel with uncanny precision. Through shattered dust and savage twilight, the bounty hunter's silhouette reappeared, his cold eyes locking once more on the girl as he slipped into the darkness. The chase stretched onward, relentless, unyielding. The ground beneath them surged in furious protest. The ravine floor cracked wider, swallowing stone and earth with a hungry roar that swallowed their root. Jagged horror cleaved the night. The cazador planted his feet firmly on bleeding earth, voice raw but firm. "The land remembers every wrong. This battle is more than flesh and blood. It is the spirit of this broken world fighting to endure." The girl's fingers tightened, drawing silent strength from the man who had become both shield and storm. Around them, the restless earth pulsed like a living thing, awoken from nightmare. Then, cutting through the choking dust, came a whisper, cold and relentless, the voice of the frontier's oldest reckoning. Your enemies are not just behind you anymore. The ravine held its breath, and with one final shudder, the unforgiving desert sealed the promise of doom. The first pale light of dawn spilled slowly into the ravine, painting the jagged walls with soft hues of amber and rose. The earth, still trembling faintly beneath their feet, seemed exhausted, as if the very breath of the desert had been spent on this restless night. The distant echoes of battle had faded into a heavy silence, broken only by ragged breaths and the whispered wind weaving through the rocks. The cazador leaned heavily against the cool stone, his face pale but resolute. The sharp sting in his side had dulled to a constant ache, a cruel reminder of the cost paid to protect the fragile hope at his side. The girl, no longer trembling but still wary, sat quietly beside him, her dark eyes wide with exhaustion and unspoken questions. They had survived, against foes relentless as the desert sun and dangers older than memories. Yet the price of survival weighed heavily upon them both. The woman in leather, who had appeared like a shadow born of the land itself, wiped the blood from a shallow cut across her cheek. Her fierce gaze softened for a breath as she watched the pair resting in the nascent light. Then, stepping forward, she broke the silence. "This land is older than any grudge carried by men," she said, voice low but steady. "It takes its toll, but it also grants mercy where strength and will endure." The cachador nodded, eyes tracing the soft outline of the girl's still form. "She carries more than scars," he murmured. "She carries the spirit of those who will not be broken by hatred or fear." The girl shifted slightly, raising tired eyes to meet his. In that gaze was a flicker of the fierce hope that had drawn the cachador back from his long-held detachment, the fragile human bond forged in the depths of peril. "How do we move forward?" she asked, voice small but unwavering. The woman considered the question, her fingers brushing the worn leather pouch at the cachador's belt, the ancient tokens inside seeming to pulse softly with unseen power. "You do not face the dawn alone," she said. "There are others, the scattered remnants of a people bound by blood and survival. You must find them, unite with them. Only then can the shadows truly be lifted." The cachador's jaw tightened. The hunt had been but one thread in a tapestry woven through decades. Old wounds, fresh dangers, the lingering threat of forces neither blade nor bullet could easily vanquish. He had come to these lands seeking solitude, to bury ghosts. Instead, he had found a purpose. "I will not let her suffer the fate I once feared for myself," he declared. "We will stand stronger than the fear that hunts us." The girl's gaze softened, a quiet resolve settling upon her. "Then let us be the dawn to this darkness." From the rocky crevice, a faint chorus of birdsong rose with the morning light, a tender hymn against the harsh breath of the frontier. The woman's shadow lengthened as she turned toward the path beyond the ravine. "Follow me. The road ahead is long, but not without allies." Her voice held promise and warning in equal measure. The past will always chase us, but it need not define us. They rose slowly, the cazador supporting the girl's unsteady steps. Every movement was a testament to resilience, a silent vow that this chapter of pain and flight would give way to one of hope and renewal. As they emerged from the ravine's narrow mouth, the vast desert stretched out before them, harsh, unforgiving, but alive with the possibility of redemption. Behind them, the fissure lay as a scar upon the earth, a reminder of destruction wrought, but also of survival earned. The air was still charged with the memory of struggle, but beneath the surface, the pulse of life grew steady and strong. The cazador glanced once more at the girl, her hands unclenching the pouch at his side. The ancient herbs a symbol of roots unbroken by time or terror. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "But from this day forward, we walk not as hunted shadows, but as bearers of light." Her smile was faint but genuine, a fragile dawn born from night's deepest fears. They stepped forward together, three figures bound by fate, each carrying the legacy of survival and the promise of a new dawn. The desert wind rose gently, sweeping across the plain like a benediction. It carried with it a whisper, not of fear, but of fierce hope and enduring courage. And as the sun breached the horizon, spilling gold across the empty land, the frontier held its breath, and then at last exhaled in quiet peace.